I'm Patricia Ezechie, and this is Proactive Empowered Careers, a space for thinking about careers differently, not as something separate from who you are, but as an expression of you and the life you want to live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. In the last episode, we explored something quite important: what success actually feels like. Not the external markers like title, income, or recognition, but the internal experience of success. Those moments where you feel present, engaged, at ease with what you're doing and how you're doing it. And when you start paying attention to those moments, you begin to notice something else. Whether what you're doing and how you're living actually match who you are. Your work, your values, your energy, your life, not in theory, but in your everyday life. And that's what we're going to explore here today, the idea of congruence. What it actually means, how it shows up in real life, and why it matters so much when it comes to your career and the life you want to live. So what do we mean by congruence? It's when who you are and how you're living match. Match in a way that feels real to you. You're not constantly adjusting yourself to fit what's expected. You're not performing a version of you that isn't you, because you recognize yourself in your life and the life that you're living, in your decisions, in how you spend your time, in how you show up. That doesn't mean everything is easy or that there are no compromises or difficult moments. Life is life. It's still life, it's positive and it's negative. But underneath it, when we think about congruence, there's a sense of consistency, a sense that your choices make sense to you. Some people might call that alignment, some might call it authenticity, but at its core, it's being at ease with yourself. Now, most people actually become aware of congruence by first experiencing the opposite, incongruence. That feeling of mismatch. You say one thing, but you feel another. You do something that doesn't really reflect who you are. You succeed externally, but feel strangely detached internally. Or you adapt so effectively to expectations that you slowly lose track of what you actually want. And the tricky thing about incongruence is that it isn't often dramatic like so many things that we're talking about. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up more quietly than that. Like a low-level tension, a sense of effort where there shouldn't be, a feeling of being slightly out of step with yourself. And over time, that being out of step with yourself starts to take its toll. Not because something has gone catastrophically wrong, but because something somewhere in you is no longer true to who you are, because something somewhere is no longer true for you. So what does congruence actually feel like? And it's not a big moment where everything suddenly clicks into place. It's actually often much simpler than that. It shows up in more ordinary ways. A sense of ease in what you're doing. A feeling that you don't have to overthink every decision. That you're not constantly second-guessing yourself. You're able to move through your day without feeling like you're pulling yourself in different directions, trying to please everybody. There's less friction. Less effort spent trying to be who you think you should be. And more a sense that you can just be you. It doesn't mean everything is perfect, but it does mean that what you're doing and how you're doing it make sense to you and feel right to you. So I think one of the simplest ways to understand congruence is through energy. When we're congruent, we spend less energy managing the gap between who we are and how we're showing up. We're not constantly monitoring ourselves or editing what we say or adjusting how we come across. We're not performing a version of ourselves that isn't real. And we're not having to translate what we really think or feel into something that feels more acceptable. All of that takes energy. And when we begin to close that gap, that energy becomes available for other things. For thinking. For creating. For connecting to ourselves and other people. For contributing. And something else begins to shift as well. When we begin to close that gap, there's more space. Not because life has suddenly become more simple, but because we're no longer carrying that constant, unnecessary friction of trying to be who we're not. And it's often in that space that congruence starts to show up more clearly. Not in big, life-changing decisions, but in small, everyday moments. Saying what you actually think. Setting boundaries that reflect your real capacity and what you really feel. Choosing something because it feels interesting, not because it looks impressive. Allowing yourself to want something without immediately having to justify it. These moments may seem ordinary, but they accumulate. And over time, they begin to change our experience of our lives from the inside. And this is where it starts to become really real for our careers. Because congruence isn't something abstract. It shows up in very practical ways in our careers. In the kind of work you're doing, in how you're doing it, and in how that work feels to you on a day-to-day basis. You might notice it in what you're naturally drawn to, in what holds your attention, in what feels engaging rather than draining, in the environments where you feel more like yourself and the ones where you don't, in the pace you're working at, what feels sustainable and what quietly takes more out of you than it gives back, in how you make decisions, whether you feel clear or whether you find yourself constantly second-guessing yourself. And in the moments where something feels slightly off, not wrong enough to immediately change what it is, but enough for you to notice. Because congruence in your career, like so many of the things that we've talked about, isn't about getting everything right. It's about paying attention to those signals and that information over time, and allowing those signals to inform the direction you move in. Because over time, your career isn't shaped by one big decision. It's shaped by what you consistently notice and what you choose to respond to and act on. And this is the part that often surprises people, because congruence doesn't always feel easy to move towards. Sometimes it feels unfamiliar, even unsettling, especially if you spent years adapting, meeting other people's expectations, achieving on other people's terms and conditions, doing what's required. Because once congruence starts to emerge, something changes. You're no longer just responding to what's expected of you. You're starting to respond to yourself, your preferences, your needs, what matters to you, what doesn't. And that brings a different kind of responsibility because you get to decide and you have to choose and you have to acknowledge what you're actually seeing and feeling. And you have to own what you want. And at some point, you realize that in all of that, the buck stops with you. There isn't something or someone else to defer to in the same way, and that can feel really exposing. Not because it's visible to others, but because it's visible to you. You can't unsee it. You know the buck stops with you, and that's where the discomfort often sits. Because part of you may want the clarity, another part of you may not want the responsibility that comes with it. It can feel safer to stay inside expectations, to keep moving along a path that's already been defined for you. So the discomfort isn't just about things becoming clearer, it's about what that clarity now asks of you. Ownership. Now, congruence isn't a destination, and it isn't something that you arrive at once and then that's it. It changes because you change. Your life changes, your priorities shift, what matters to you deepens or becomes clearer. And what might have once felt right might not feel that way anymore. So congruence becomes less about getting to a fixed point in time or place and more about staying connected to who you are now. Noticing what still fits, what no longer does, where you recognize yourself and where you don't. And allowing that to inform how you move forward rather than anything else. So this feels like a good place to pause for a moment to consider something. Where in your life do you currently feel congruent? And where might there be a sense of mismatch? Not as something you need to fix immediately, but as information. Signals pointing to places that may want your attention. Just notice as you ask yourself that question or those questions. So I think I'd like to leave you with this today. Congruence is often quiet, but it's deeply stabilizing. It builds trust in yourself, confidence in your choices, and a sense that your life is yours, even as it continues to evolve. And that feeling of ownership changes how things feel, how success feels, how decisions feel, and how your work feels, and ultimately how you feel. So in the next episode, we'll explore something that both supports and challenges this whole idea of congruence, and that's choice. How we make decisions, why some choices feel heavy, and how to move forward even when we're uncertain. And that's what we'll explore together. So until then, take the very best care of yourselves. This has been Proactive Empowered Careers. If today's episode resonated, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss what comes next. And remember, your career isn't separate from who you are. It's an expression of you and the life you want to live.